Vincent Pedone. He's a former state representative for about 20 years. And he's currently the executive officer of the State University Council of Presidents. And he's a sincere friend, Turkey Trip alumni. So please help me welcome Mr. Pedone.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. So as Burhan said, that I'm an alum of the Turkey Trip, and it was speaking to Leo and a couple of other House members who I served with for 20 years. Met Burhan and we're looking for a higher ed person to head over to Turkey and in Azerbaijan with them. So they said, had you been, you should go. I said, all right. So when I met with the speaker and he was telling me about it, he said, now listen, don't create an international incident. Sure enough, right when we get over there, we get right in the middle of the protests. And but it was a great trip. It was very enlightening. I got to tell you, one of the things that sticks out from that trip, from Azerbaijan especially, was we had a roundtable discussion with the U.S. ambassador, or the Azerbaijani ambassador to the United States, and a question was asked of him: What are your long-term goals, your short-term and long-term goals for the country? And his answer, when I've come back, I've asked a couple of people if they, what do you think the answer would be? And it would be economic development, human rights, or what have you. The answer was, we hope to remain independent. And I thought back, imagine if that question was asked to people here in the United States in 1812, or 1820. It might be the same answer, but it's something that we just don't think about. And it was that type of cultural exchange and experience that gives people from the United States or wherever the opportunity to go to another country and hear and understand what their population, what their leaders, what their people are thinking. And it was a great trip. As we were over in Turkey, I was able to make a number of contacts with higher education institutions. And there was one of those higher ed institutions coming here to the United States in October, and we're hoping to get the international relations directors for both the universities here and the university in Turkey, in Istanbul, to connect and hopefully put together an international study program. So as Burhan said, I was a state rep for 20 years. I got elected when I was 24 from Worcester, a small district in Worcester. And the funny thing is I took over for a legislator who had served for nearly 30 years. His name was Andrew Calaro. So when he was in his late 80s, when he ended up saying that he wasn't going to seek re-election, and I was in my early 20s when I said that I would seek the election for the seat. So we went from one of the oldest members of the House to one of the youngest members of the House. And when I left the position back in January of 2012, that seat had been vacated only once in 50 years, if you think about it. And there was this article written in Worcester just about Andrew Calaro and myself and the amount of time that we spent at the State House. And looking back, what he was able to accomplish and what I think I was able to accomplish, I'm very proud of. So that 20 years has come in handy with me in the new position I have. And that position is, I'm the executive officer for the Council of State University Presidents here in Massachusetts. So it's a long title for basically public policy director for the Massachusetts State Universities. I have 9 presidents who I work for, and my job is, I tell people my job is 1, making sure that they continue to talk to each other, and 2, making sure that we have nice, clear, succinct message going out to the general population, to the business community, and to the people at Beacon Hill about what we're doing, who we are, and where we think the state university system should go in order to help the Commonwealth and its economy. So Burhan asked me to come here and just speak real quickly about Massachusetts public higher education system, and in particular the state university system, and how we are a leader in public higher education and public higher education funding in the United States. So just a few statistics about public higher education. Over 50% of Massachusetts undergraduate students choose to go to Massachusetts public higher education institutions. 45 years ago, only 30% of undergraduates in Massachusetts were public higher education students. High school students here in Massachusetts, when they do choose to go to college, 3 out of 4 of them stay here in Massachusetts and go to one of our schools. Over 22,000 students attend public higher education here in Massachusetts. I'd like to say that the Massachusetts State University system, but it's really all of public higher education, really drives our economy here in the Commonwealth. There are 40,000 degrees that are conferred every year from our public universities and colleges. Of that, UMass has 15,000 of those degrees. The state university system has about 11,000, and the community colleges have about 13,000 degrees of certificates. We put out more graduates every year than all the other colleges combined. 9 out of 10 graduates of Massachusetts public higher education remain in the Commonwealth to live, work, raise their families, and contribute to our economy. And that's an incredible statistic. When I go up to Boston, Beacon Hill, and I ask for legislators to consider investing in our public university system, what I say to them is there is not a return on investment greater than that in which public higher education students are subsidized. Because for every dollar that Massachusetts taxpayers put into our system, there's a return of about $9 to that one. And for every student that goes to our schools and graduates, 9 out of 10 of them stay here in Massachusetts to live and work and contribute to the economy. So there isn't a better program that even as a legislator that we could look at investing in than our public higher education system. And historically, I was at the State House for 20 years, and there were some good budgets, there were some bad budgets, there were some great economic times, and there were some really difficult economic times. So prior to September 11th, 2001, there was a lot of money around. That was at the height of our economy. And I remember the state universities, the public higher education there was a real push to get some funding back into the system, because over the course of the prior decade, public higher education was slashed. It was cut. It was in order to balance the budget. And we were able to put a little bit of money into the public higher education system in the early 2000s. But after the September 11th incidents and after the collapse in Wall Street and the economy really going down, we looked to cut again. And as legislators, we felt we needed to protect our basic services. And I was part of that group that said that public higher education, really is one of the first things that we need to look at because of the ability for students to be able to go out and get loans and what have you. And when we're talking about making very difficult choices, those choices were either cutting our food stamps or our funding that goes to the poor and the indigent, or making reductions, as difficult as it was to public higher education. We had to choose the latter. So those were difficult choices. Now, as the economy starts to strengthen, and I have a different perspective as serving in the legislature, I was able to go up to Beacon Hill and talk with them about the last 20 years and the difficult choices that have been made in our budget and putting our budget together, and the cuts that have been made in public higher education. I remember shortly before I left, we level funded public higher education, right across the board. It was level funded. However, what we didn't do is we didn't fully fund our collective bargaining agreements. And for those of you that don't know what the collective bargaining agreements are, the governor's office basically negotiates contracts with our employees, with our faculty. Well, it's a government negotiated contract. However, the legislature is responsible for funding those contracts. And I remember when we were doing the budget, one of the things we didn't do was we didn't fully fund our collective bargaining agreements. Now, we said that we were going to level fund our institutions, but at the same time we didn't fund our collective bargaining agreements, so when it's all said and done, it was an actual reduction for our state university system. So when I took this job, I had this different perspective on some of the challenges that exist at the State House with putting a budget together, but also the new challenges, the challenges that I was able to see firsthand in this new job. So when I went up to the speaker in order to advocate for public higher education dollars, and then again, in particular, the state university system, what I said to him was, there hasn't been a leader since he and I were elected, 20 years. And you can probably go back 20 years before that, where a leader of the Commonwealth, whether it was the speaker, or the Senate president, or the governor, said these words: we must invest in public higher education. There hasn't been one, not in the tenure that I was there, and probably in the years prior to me. So I said to the speaker, wouldn't it be great for you to be the first person, in our generation to actually utter those words from a position of power, a position of strength? He and Chairman Dempsey, the chairman of Ways and Means, Brian Dempsey, and I worked together to try to come to an agreement on how much funding there should be. Now, obviously, I was pushing for as much as I could. Just around the same time, the president of UMass, Bob Corrett, was starting to develop this campaign around a very unique and simple catchphrase, and it was the 50-50 campaign. And he would ask the question, don't you think Massachusetts should be, the Commonwealth should be at least a 50% partner with our public higher education institutions? And every person you say that to says, I think so, makes sense. It was a great little tagline. So as I was speaking with Bob DeLeo as a speaker and Brian Dempsey about trying to help them put their budget together, I said all you have to do is look towards UMass and their president and adopt what they are saying. This 50-50 discussion makes sense. So, long story short, they ended up doing that. And Bob DeLeo became the first person that since I was in my tenure at the State House, that I heard out of those words that we must invest in public higher education. Now, it's a good investment, and it really is a good investment. And here's why. If you look across all of New England, the Massachusetts public higher education institutions, and in particular the state university system, offers probably one of the most competitive education opportunities here in New England. And to go to one of our schools, it probably will cost, if you had to pay for everything, that means room and board, tuition, and fees, it would probably cost you around $17,000 a year on average. You couldn't get that type of that type of agreement and cost from any other school, especially the publics. If you look at the public schools all throughout New England, we are ranked as one of the most affordable. But the question that continued to come up was, how do we stay affordable when our state dollars are continuing to get reduced or continuing to get eaten up through inflation? So the question that I continued to ask up at Beacon Hill was, what is the most important issue for you as a legislator? What is the most important issue for you as an administration or the governor? It never came back, we need to make our public higher education institutions better because they're not doing the job. It was just the opposite. It was just the opposite. They recognized the great job that is being done by the public higher education institutions, but the number one concern on Beacon Hill was how do we keep our universities and colleges affordable? And it was a very simple answer. We have right now a 16-to-1 ratio student to faculty. And if we want to keep that 16-to-1 ratio and not cut our faculty members, we needed more state dollars. Because quite honestly, right now our tuition is very low, but our fees are probably 8 or 9 times the cost of our tuition. And you know, and to run an institution, and you do absorb costs, and if the Commonwealth isn't paying for them, somebody has to. So the things that I would say at the State House were, this is a tax on our students if the Commonwealth as a body is not investing tax dollars into the public higher education system. And the reason I say that is somebody has to pay the bill. And if it's not going to be the Commonwealth, then it's going to be the student. If we diversify and we get tax dollars to support us, it will then do what the legislature wanted, which is reduce the cost to the student. So in an agreement, as the leaders on Beacon Hill, the governor, the Senate president, and the speaker started moving towards this agreement of a 50-50 calculation, so that the Commonwealth would pick up 50% of the cost of education and the student would then pick up 50% of the cost of education. As we move towards that agreement, the issue of how do we keep this affordable for our students became the #1 concern on Beacon Hill. And what we agreed to do, all of us, all 3 segments, UMass, state universities, and the community colleges, all agreed to freeze our fees if we were to receive a certain amount of dollars. We all did that. We all got increased funding, and when all of New England schools saw an increase in the cost of educating, of going to the higher education institutions, every single school saw an increase. Massachusetts public universities and colleges did an increase. So not only, if you look at our system through metrics that were developed by an independent group, you would see that the Massachusetts public higher education institutions are superior in the public higher education world, but now they are also the most affordable across all New England. So, you know, when Berhan asked me to talk about what I do and how we as a Commonwealth really are driving an agenda nationwide, from the president on down to the president of a school, everyone is talking about making schools more affordable, with less debt for students, and better. So I think we have the third one down pretty well. I think we are a very good system with very good students, with very good faculty, producing very good graduates who then make up our white collar and our blue collar economy. And we're tackling the other two. More affordable means less debt. With the Commonwealth and their investment over the past 6 months, which is a reinvestment in Massachusetts, and then a commitment to continue that funding stream for the next 3 years, I'm certain that we will be able to continue to reduce the cost. Our goal is to get to the 50-50 match from the state to the student, and with this legislature in place, and hopefully with the new administration, as you all know, there's a governor's race coming up within the next 12 months. So we'll have Governor Patrick in his budget for the next year going into FY15, but we'll then have a different administration, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. Hopefully that person will be amenable to supporting the 50-50 agreement that we have. So I think, you know, just to wrap it up, I feel that we have a great public higher education system in Massachusetts, but even as a legislator, I recognized that there were tremendous obstacles that we needed to overcome when it came to funding. And last year, our state universities were at about 30% funded by the Commonwealth. Within the next 2.5 years, we'll have an agreement to reach a 50-50 split. I think it was a very successful year. I have a contract negotiation coming up. I hope the presidents recognize that it was a very successful year. And what comes out of this is an educated workforce. Just one more point. There was a study that was done by this independent group that looked at metrics for our institutions, and what we found was that by the year 2019 or 2020, there will be a 50,000. There will be a degree shortage of at least 50,000 people here in the Commonwealth. So that would mean there are businesses that need to hire people with either baccalaureate level or postgraduate degrees. And according to the number of people that we're graduating each year, this is projected to be that there's going to be a 50,000 person degree shortage. Right now, we're trying to figure out how we address that. One of the most logical ways is to increase our graduation rates and ensure that students who are coming out of high school who go into our first year programs 3 years later then graduate, and they don't drop out after the first year. If we can increase our graduation rate, we can reach we can meet that divide that exists. And one way to do that is by studies show that students who live on campus in dorms in a 4-year setting have a 60% better chance of graduating than their commuter student peers. So another push, and it's something that we're initiating right now, is more dollars to assist in our building of residences on the campuses. We almost are at 50% residents for our students. So across the campus, there's campuses like Mass Maritime Academy that have well over a 90% on-campus community, but there are schools like Framingham State or Worcester State that are only at about 40%. The goal would be to get those two large schools up to 50%, which again statistically would show that there's a better chance that they will graduate and our numbers would increase. So it's something to think about, and it's something that we're working on right now to try to figure out how we meet that delta and address it, but at the same time keep our costs to our students relatively low and ultimately provide them with a superior education. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I think that Brahan said, about 20 minutes to talk, and
I mean, it's time for Q&A.
Yeah, whatever you'd like. If there are any questions.
So, if you project the success of Massachusetts to other states to make it happen for the nation, I mean, not all the states are doing as good as Massachusetts in terms of budget, and so will it require more support from the federal government, or what will be the solution?
Well, let me say, Massachusetts still ranks very low amongst the amount of dollars that go to our public higher education system. We still rank around 30th in the nation. However, saying that, we ranked number 2 behind New Hampshire on the percentage of increase that we had in the budget. Now, the reason New Hampshire had a bigger percentage is because they virtually eliminated their public higher education budget a couple of years ago. So in order, they just put a couple of $1 million into their public higher education system, and and it shot their percentages way up. Massachusetts invested $100 million of new money into their public higher education system, all 3 segments. My segment, State Universities, got $15 million. The community colleges got $20 million of new funding, and UMass got the rest. additionally, what we also did was we fully funded our collective bargaining agreements for the first time probably in the last decade. So there was this wash of new money which increased our percentage, and we basically lead the nation of new investment. However, we still rank very low as a system, and the contributions to which states contribute to the public higher education system. I'm saying that if we can get to the 50-50 agreement, that would raise our numbers considerably. Just an aside, as I scan the nation for different things that are happening in public higher education, I've noticed states all across the country are talking about this 50-50 agreement. So Bob Correct, really struck a nerve. And right when I heard it, I told our president, I said, it's logical, it's simple, and it's easy for not only the general public, but the legislature to wrap its mind around. We should be a 50% partner in the education of our public higher education students. It makes sense. So the nation is looking, at least many states across the nation are looking to try to adopt that model when they're lobbying their own legislature. Sir?
If I followed, I think you said there's 27,000 bachelor degrees awarded in the state university and college system?
There are 40,000 degrees conferred each year. So 15,000 come from UMass, about 11,000 come from the state universities.
But in your 40, wasn't about 12 or 13,000?
13,500 or so are either associate degrees or certificate programs.
Okay, so say 27,000.
Yeah.
In that that or the 40,000 is larger than all the degrees, the private colleges award in the Commonwealth?
Yes.
So what's the number that the private colleges award?
I don't know what the number is. It just
Okay, well, I just got struck by it.
yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, all the schools in Massachusetts, we have 50% of those kids.
Mm-hmm.
We do produce a significant workforce when it's coming out.
So in theory, then it could be around 54, 55,000 total degrees in the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm.
And we're shot 50.
9 out of 10 of our students stay here in the Commonwealth.
Right.
Less than 50% of the private schools students stay. Right. So when you look at, I mean, and it's even the flagship institutions, the BCs, the BUs, the MITs, the Harvards, it's even much less, much less. So
I'll get towards it if I can. Compared to 5 years ago, what's it take to get into the state university system? SAT scores and GPA.
it's funny. When I first got elected, so I represented a real blue-collar community in Worcester, east side of Worcester. It's all three-decade neighborhoods. Very used to a legislator, a state rep was hands-on, and this rep would help somebody get into UMass or help them get a job, what have you. And that's what they expected from me. So one of the first things that I was asked to do for certain people within the constituency was to help them try to get into UMass. 20 years ago, I was able to do that. As time passed, it was much more difficult to get kids into UMass because SAT scores skyrocketed. The UMass expanded its national portfolio. We're starting to take in more out-of-state students. So instead of it being a 9-to-1 ratio, it dropped to an 8-to-1 ratio. Now it's a 7-to-1 ratio in student to out-of-state. So it's shifted from trying to get kids into UMass to trying to get kids into the state, at that point, state colleges. And we've since changed the name to state university system. But in order now to get into, our competitors are now the small liberal arts schools, the Clark universities, or the Assumption colleges, the schools that are going to continue to struggle, to meet their needs. right now to get into one of our schools, depending on the actual class, the actual course of study, is probably around a 3.3, a 3.4, 3.3. However, if you wanted to get into a nursing program at Salem State, you had to have all AP classes in your junior and senior year in high school. And you have to have a GPA coming out of high school of around, I think the average was like 3.75. And then you had to score, the SATs is different now, it's 3 courses, so you had to score around 1,800 on your SATs. It is incredibly competitive. There were students that were getting rejected from Salem State and going to one of the flagship nursing programs in some of the other private schools. Or you had students getting accepted to the BC nursing program and the Salem State nursing program. So then a decision had to be made. Do I want to get a baccalaureate degree from BC and come out with $200,000 in debt, or do I want to go to Salem State and come out with, virtually no debt? And so depending on the program, we are very competitive with our private university counterparts. And obviously, if you just want to get in general studies, you could probably, the GPA can drop. State law requires that you have a 2.0 GPA and a certain level on your SATs, but it's a sliding scale. But we've become very, very competitive, much more so than when I first got elected 20 years ago. Sir?
That was a great talk. I have a follow-up question on that question. So you mentioned that UMass has 16:1 students to faculty. And you said it was around $17K per year, all these tuitions and fees included.
At UMass State Universities.
Yeah, right.
So state university
Yeah, those might be one of the reasons why students might choose those state universities. But my question is, we're living in Massachusetts, and private universities in Massachusetts is one of the top all over the world. And I might be wrong, but I believe students, first year college or university students, choose private universities comparing to state universities. And I've seen all private universities campus, and they're all full. And my question is, how do you see a competition weigh against those private universities in order to, still their salaries, their tuition fees might be $40,000, $50,000 per year. Still, students choose those universities, and they think that by getting debt from these loans and stuff, they could still pay after the graduation from those universities, because they might have a better position and better salaries comparing to state universities graduation. So,
Right. So the schools under my umbrella are Worcester State, Westfield State, Salem State, Mass College of Liberal Arts, Mass Art, the Mass Maritime Academy, Framingham State, Fitchburg State, and Bridgewater State. So those 9 institutions. Of the 9 institutions, there are 2 specialty ones. Massachusetts School of Art and Design, which is right here in Boston, and the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. The distinction for the Massachusetts School of Art and Design is that it's the only public funded art institution in the Commonwealth, in the country. So it's a huge distinction. So in order to go to Mass Art, a competitor for Mass Art is probably the Rhode Island School of Art and Design, Rhode Island School of Design, RISD. Mass Art's main competitor, obviously, is RISD. They need to stay competitive with them. The Massachusetts Maritime Academy is probably one of the best, if not the best, in the nation, and it's the most affordable in the nation. So those 2 specialty schools aside, my schools do not see the flagship institutions as their competitors. We're not competing against MIT, or we're not competing against Harvard, we're not competing against BC, except in certain specialty programs. Who we are competing against are the mid-level private liberal arts schools. So Clark University, or Assumption College, or or Wellesley, even. I mean, we see students who are accepted to Wellesley who are deciding to come to our public institutions because they will walk out with incredibly fewer dollars in debt than if they did go there. Again, going back to my legislative days, what I saw was a shift from a desire of Massachusetts students, at least from my community, who wanted to go to the private institutions for undergrad, to a shift to coming to our public institutions for undergrad, and then looking towards a private school for their post-secondary work. And it was I think that it was a shift. We don't have any problem right now getting our students. Our applications are up every year from the previous year. Our numbers are up every year from the previous year. And this year we have 52,000 students in our public state university schools. So we don't have an issue of getting students. I will say that some of the mid-level liberal arts schools, smaller school campuses, have an incredible problem getting. I'm seeing an incredible problem getting students to their campuses. So we're not hurting right now for competition. I mean for students. What we are hurting for is recognition that our schools are as good as our private university counterparts, and we don't see them as the enemy at all. We really don't. I mean, we see them as colleagues, just in a different funding scheme, because we couldn't educate all the students in the Commonwealth that wanted to go to school. One of the things that we are trying to build is a better international relationship and a better out-of-state relationship. We still want to keep the goal of 90% of our students come from Massachusetts, because of those 90% stay here. But out-of-state students bring a whole different type of atmosphere to the campus. So there is a strong desire to increase our international student base and our out-of-student base. But again, we are primarily a Massachusetts-funded public higher education system that is tailored to Massachusetts residents. Did you have something?
Yes. I think that seeking the job, one of the main interests for the student. And do you have the rough image of the ratio of the graduate or the getting degree student who got the job when he graduated the school? And do the school or do the state government assist these students to hunt for the job hunting?
So the first part of your question was, do we track? Is that what it was? Do we track students
So
in
what the amount, what the ratio, percentage of the getting job?
Sure.
At the point of their graduate.
Within, I'm glad you asked that. So there's this whole discussion about the return on investment for your public higher, for your higher education certificate or diploma. And we read all the time about people who are coming out of college with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees working in a diner somewhere, or working at a movie theater. And although that's heartbreaking and that happens, if it does happen to our students, they have much less debt. That being said, and I keep throwing out this number 90% because it hovers around 90%. 9 out of 10 of our students, 1 year after graduation, either are employed or are seeking an advanced degree. And they're doing that, without all the debt incurred by student loans or what have you. So 9 out of 10. So thank you. I appreciate everybody's time, and I hope, I'm gonna stick around, I hope what you see from our Massachusetts public higher education institutions, from UMass all the way to our community college system, that, the dollars are being well spent because they're going to educating our workforce and driving our economy. And I will say that without our higher education, our public and private higher education institutions in the Commonwealth, we would not have survived the downturn in the economy as well as we did. Massachusetts really didn't have the huge valley in the crash that other states had. And a lot of it had to do with the economy of higher education, both public and private. So, we not only are we an investment in the future, but we're also a huge contributor to the recovery of our economy. But I want to thank you all for your time.
Thank you for your speech, and thank you all for coming.